Chapter 1. I was caught burying the 6 pups. That's how my life ended and began all at once. The cutting wind screamed a lonely dirge across the barren expanse of the frostbane forest, stripping the skin of any warmth. Ilara knelt, the deep snow biting through the thin fabric of her tunic because this was the only way. A necessary sacrifice. Her hands, pale as porcelain and threaded with freezing blue veins, meticulously hollowed out 6 small depressions in the hard earth. She believed burying the 6 pups she carried was the last desperate act of protection she could offer, the final price for her own terrible survival. Her heart felt like a block of ice in her chest, heavy with a guilt that had been her sole companion for years. She had spent a lifetime fleeing, convinced her very existence was a deadly force, a curse that incinerated her home and family the night her powers flared. Now, the pups, tiny wolf forms preserved perfectly in ancient ice, pulsed faintly with a terrifying foreign heat only when she touched them. It was a cruel paradox. Her touch brought them warmth, but simultaneously sucked the precious life force from her own dwindling core. She dared not hold them long, because the fading strength in her muscles felt like sand pouring from an unseen crack. This devastating reality, the fact that her deepest desire, to nurture and save them, was slowly killing her, was the high-stakes conflict defining her lonely world. She paused, lifting the first pup, its fur stiff and silvered with frost. A strange metallic scent, sharp and unsettling like ozone before a storm, began to saturate the air. It was a smell of immense power and territorial arrogance, an alpha's signature, and it struck a primal, instinctual chord of terror deep in her omega core. Her isolation was ending. This overwhelming scent meant a disruption was not just coming, it had arrived. She quickly placed the pup back down, attempting to cover the tiny grave with a flurry of snow. What if he sees them? What if he connects the cold pups with the whispers of the white healer? Her breath hitched, ragged and shallow, because discovery meant certain death. Chapter 2. Heat, resistance, destiny. The shadow that fell over Ilara was sudden, vast, and suffocating, swallowing the already dim light of the frozen afternoon. Cale Dravenhart, the Alpha King, moved with the devastating, silent intensity of a predator who had found its mark. He was magnificent, a tower of muscle and dark, imposing presence, his eyes the fierce gold of a desert sun. His goal, to locate and neutralize the source of the forbidden magic, was all-consuming. His gaze instantly locked onto Ilara's alabaster features and the dark, wet holes she had dug in the ground, a clear sign of resurrection rituals, or so he believed. His expression was a mask of suspicion and ruthless authority. His hand shot out, not in violence, but to capture, clamping around her thin arm just above the elbow. That single point of contact detonated an explosion of sensation. It was not gentle, it was a physical blow, a rush of pure, raw heat that scorched away the years of her icy isolation. The air thickened, vibrating with a desperate, ancient pull. Ilara gasped, her vision momentarily blurring as she felt the devastating, overwhelming force of the mate bond igniting between them. Cale recoiled, his golden eyes widening in furious disbelief, because this fearful albino omega couldn't possibly be his destiny. He fought the pull immediately, his primal instinct to claim warred savagely with his rational need to execute his duty and punish the mage.
Furthermore, standing slightly behind Cale, his beta Ronin watched the scene with an unreadable, unsettling stillness, his features cold and calculating. He didn't move, didn't speak, but a dark satisfaction flickered in his eyes when Cale instinctively tightened his grip on Ilara rather than discarding her. This detail was a subtle hook, raising questions about Ronin's true intentions and allegiance. Ronin had a secret mission, one he'd been executing for years, keeping Ilara exactly where Cale could find her, but only when her life force had been drained low enough to make her vulnerable. He had been hunting her for a very different reason, one linked directly to the pups. Cale, blinded by the sudden trauma of the mate bond, was utterly unaware of the treachery unfolding beneath his nose. He arrested her, dragging her and the 6 precious, frozen forms away toward Blackstone Palace. Chapter 3: The Traitor's Cleanup. The journey to Blackstone Palace was a nightmare of agonizing silence, punctuated only by the rhythmic, heavy tread of Cale's boots and the chilling sensation of the mate bond attempting to knit 2 completely opposite souls together. Alara, trembling with shock, was thrown into a temporary dungeon cell. The pups were carelessly placed on a stone slab in the corner. Her entire self screamed to reach out to reassure them, but the fear of further life force drain of touching them held her paralyzed. She was a prisoner in the heart of the Alpha King's territory. Cale returned quickly, his scent filling the small chamber, an intoxicating blend of cold stone and wildfire. He paced, his movements sharp and agitated. "The bond is a lie, a trick of the magic you were performing," he declared, his voice a low, gravelly sound that vibrated through the floor. He needed to believe this because the idea of being tied to a creature of forbidden magic was an insult to his royal bloodline and duty. He stared at her, the intensity of his gaze a physical weight. Because of this tension, the mate bond pulsed, making the air in the cell feel thick and unbreathable, a suffocating, passionate pressure. Meanwhile, Beta Ronin, working meticulously in the palace archives, was erasing every trace of the old prophecy concerning the White Healer. He smiled, thin and cruel. His thoughts were a cold, hard counterpoint to the palace's anxiety. Her exile was never an accident. It was the result of a meticulously planned cover-up. Ronin's personal goal was to ensure the true nature of Alara's powers, and the pup's significance remained hidden, because he needed her alive only long enough to awaken the pups for his own sinister purposes. He remembered the night of the fire, not as a tragedy, but as a necessary cleanup, where he silenced those who knew the White Healer was not a destructor, but a restorer. Chapter 4: The Captive's Awakening. Cale's interrogation was relentless, a psychological siege of authority and suspicion, because he couldn't reconcile the raw, demanding pull of the mate bond with her status as a forbidden mage. Alara was confined to a sumptuous chamber, gilded and soft, yet the stone walls felt tighter than the dungeon. She was a bird in a cage built of wealth and fear. "Speak the truth," Cale commanded, his voice a low, rough rumble. "How do you control the resurrection ritual?" Alara desperately pleaded ignorance, demanding freedom. "I only found them. If I possessed dark magic, why would I be trying to bury them?" she countered, the guilt still clouding her judgment. Their exchange was charged with antagonism and undeniable magnetic heat. She stumbled backward, overwhelmed by a sudden, intense psychic spike from Cale's frustration that felt like a whip crack across her spirit. As she fell, her hand instinctively brushed the nearest frozen pup, which Cale had grudgingly allowed into the room. A soft, silvery energy pulsed from her fingers. The pup's ear twitched. A delicate film of ice retreated from its tiny snout, and it exhaled a visible puff of warm air. The thaw had begun. Cale stared, his mask of control slipping, revealing a flicker of intense shock and profound possessiveness. This spontaneous thawing was the inciting incident, irrevocably changing her status from prisoner to priceless commodity. Moreover, this development sent a jolt of genuine terror through Alara. This immediate, impossible reaction from the pup solidified her deepest fear. Her touch was potent, unpredictable, and now wholly exposed. Cale immediately seized the pup, his grip almost bruising, his gaze now purely analytical. He had witnessed a miracle or a terrifying threat. He declared her under constant watch because he needed to understand the magic before she could harm his territory or, worse, herself. She had reached the point of no return. Her freedom was gone, replaced by a destiny she could not comprehend. Chapter 5: The Heir's First Breath. The thawing pup, its fur now soft and pristine, was transferred to a secure, ancient vault built deep beneath Blackstone Palace, a move Cale justified as security, but that felt to Alara like a final, devastating separation. She protested violently, the first time she'd ever dared challenge the Alpha King. "They are not weapons for your vaults. They need warmth. They need care," she cried, but Cale was immune to her emotional plea. His need to understand the magic was overriding his nascent, instinctual mate connection. "They are my concern now," Cale stated, his tone cold and authoritative. He was driven by the shame of his lineage's theft, a secret trauma only his most trusted and treacherous Beta knew. He studied the ancient carvings on the vault doors, believing them to be wards against the death magic, utterly unaware that Beta Ronin had subtly provided him with mistranslated warnings designed to misdirect his focus. Ronin's deception was masterful. He was subtly feeding Kale just enough fear about resurrection to ensure the pups remained contained and accessible, ready for the Beta's future use. Consequently, Alara realized she had to conceal the true source of her power, that restorative life force. She feigned terror, reinforcing the notion that she had no control, that her touch was accidental and deadly. This was a vital struggle and decision point. She chose deception over truth to protect the pups from Kale's perceived ruthlessness. Just as Kale prepared to leave the vault, the first pup, the one with the alpha dominance trait, fully thawed. It didn't just move, it snapped to life, letting out a sharp, dominating whimper growl that was undeniably pure alpha. The pup's eyes locked onto Alara, and the tiny creature stumbled forward, instinctively imprinting on her first, a betrayal of pure instinct that hit Kale like a physical blow. Chapter 6, The Palace Threshold. The pup's instantaneous imprint on Alara, rejecting Kale's immediate presence, enraged and confused the Alpha King. The betrayal of instinct was the final trigger. Kale didn't kill her. He simply dragged her out of the vault and into the heart of the palace, forcing her to confront her new reality. He assigned her a lavish suite near the vault, transforming her from a prisoner of the stones to a prisoner of proximity. He commanded her to watch over the frozen pups, demanding she report any change immediately. "You will stay here," he growled, the possessive edge of the mate bond slicing through his anger. "You will not leave this wing. You will discover what you did to that creature because its fate is now tied to my kingdom's survival." Kale saw a political threat. He missed the emotional truth. This commitment forced Alara across a threshold. She was no longer in the woods, but permanently locked into the conflict of the royal house. She realized she couldn't simply escape. She had to survive within his gaze. Therefore, Alara began her difficult adaptation. She observed the court from her window, a silent, pale phantom, noting the strained tension and the whispered rumors about the sudden, beautiful albino Omega who had appeared. She started secretly reading the antique texts in her suite, seeking any lore that might explain the pup's unnaturally preserved state, searching for an alternative to the dreaded resurrection label. Her survival hinged on finding proof that she was not a curse. Unexpectedly, she found a scroll fragment mentioning an ancient, subtle magic, restoration, a kind of correction that didn't raise the dead, but brought broken things back to their true form. This discovery gave her a vital, secret hope and an immediate new goal, confirming the difference between restoration and destruction. Chapter 7, The Unruly Heir. Alara's new reality in Blackstone Palace was a confusing, intoxicating blend of fear and fascination. The massive stone halls were colder than the forbidden forest, yet Kale's presence, constantly throbbing through the mate bond, generated a fierce, internal heat that made her skin prickle. Her focus narrowed to the single thawed pup, the alpha dominant one, who now snarled at anyone but her. Consequently, Kale began forcing her into mandatory, difficult training sessions with the creature, because only Alara's touch could soothe its instinctual, high-strung rage. During one such session, the pup lunged at Kale, narrowly missing his throat. Kale slammed the pup onto the thick carpet, his own alpha dominance flaring, demanding submission. Alara screamed, leaping between them without hesitation, embracing the tiny, furious wolf. Her life force surged in panic, enveloping the pup in a warm, silvery mist. The creature instantly went limp, purring softly against her neck. Kale stared, utterly stunned, because he had never witnessed such raw, immediate control. Alara felt exhausted but victorious. This small success confirmed she could adapt and control her gift when driven by protection, but it terrified Kale further, fueling his obsession with mastering her. Moreover, Kale demanded to know how she accomplished the feat, his gold eyes burning into hers. She could only stammer. "It's not control, it's instinct." This was a half-truth, but it was enough to make Kale's internal monologue shift from mage to tool. This confrontation served as her first significant test within the palace walls, confirming her innate connection to the pups surpassed Kale's birthright. She was adapting to the rules of his castle, using her fear as fuel. The next pup, nestled in the chilling ice nearby, seemed to stir slightly, anticipating its turn. Chapter 8. Whispers of Restoration. Driven by the need to understand the true nature of her power, Alara spent her days delving into the restricted history texts Kale's librarians grudgingly provided. She devoured ancient scrolls, the brittle parchment smelling of dust and forgotten ages. She was searching specifically for anything that contrasted with the violent term resurrection. She needed an anchor, a proof that she was not a destroyer. Therefore, she found it. A dense, highly coded passage discussing a forgotten discipline, restoration magic. The text described restoration not as the reanimation of the dead, but the correction of grievous error, bringing things back to what they should have been before a corruption or trauma occurred. It was healing, amplified. She gripped the scroll so tightly her knuckles shone white, a dizzying surge of relief washing over her. The old guilt over the fire lifted a millimeter, replaced by a devastating question. If I am a restorer, what was the true form of my village before the flames? This realization was a quiet, powerful revelation that fundamentally challenged her core belief system. However, as she copied the critical passages, she noticed a shadow shift outside the small viewing window. It was Beta Ronan, his posture rigid and his movements too precise. He often lurked near her wing. Alara realized he wasn't there to serve Kale. He was there to observe her. His presence was a heavy cloak of unease, her first minor obstacle in the palace. She knew with chilling certainty that Ronan was watching what she read, actively policing the knowledge she gained. Chapter 9. The First Royal Trait. The second pup, the one gifted with heightened vision, suddenly completed its thaw. This pup was immediately calmer than the first, yet intensely focused. As Kale entered the room, the small creature began to whine and claw frantically at the eastern wall, its golden eyes darting back and forth in terror. Alara rushed to comfort it, feeling the mate bond strain as Kale stood rigid, suspicious. "It's sensing something," Alara whispered, because the pup was clearly projecting panic. "Something you can't see." Kale scoffed at the idea of a gifted pup, until the Beta Ronan entered the chamber. The pup's panic intensified tenfold, and it began barking shrilly, pointing its nose directly at a subtle, almost invisible sigil carved into a shadowed recess of the stone. Kale, finally intrigued, examined the area. He recognized the symbol, an archaic, forbidden crest of a lost, rival faction once thought to be extinct, a faction responsible for the very theft of his royal bloodline decades ago. This was a massive plot complication. Furthermore, Kale and Alara were forced into their first moment of shared, urgent purpose. They had to work together to calm the distraught pup and dismantle the hidden sigil, which pulsed with faint, disruptive magic. Kale used his brute strength to smash the carving. Alara used her restorative life force to quiet the pup's terrifying sensory overload. Their bodies pressed close together in the tense, tight space, creating a sizzling, unintentional intimacy. The mate bond flared fiercely, a blinding flash of shared triumph and desire. Chapter 10. The Mirroring Grief. Alara felt the mate bond tightening, less like a chain and more like a shared, rapid heartbeat, because Kale's suspicion was slowly morphing into a begrudging reliance. The next day, the third pup, the one designed to mirror emotions, finished thawing. It immediately began whimpering, projecting waves of profound sorrow and a chilling sense of calculated betrayal throughout the suite. The atmosphere became heavy and toxic. Alara, overwhelmed by the alien grief, dropped to her knees, clutching her head. She knew the emotion wasn't hers. It was too cold, too deep. Kale rushed in, instantly affected by the overwhelming sadness, his own face contorting with pain. He believed the pup was reflecting Alara's deep, hidden misery, confirming his fears about her dark emotional state. "It mirrors you," he accused, his voice thick with protective anger. Because of this misunderstanding, he ordered Alara to immediately isolate the pup. However, as Kale spoke, the door opened and Beta Ronan entered, claiming to deliver urgent state reports. The moment Ronan's eyes landed on the crying pup, the emotional projection intensified, spiking into a blinding wave of fury and cold dread. Ronan's face remained perfectly blank, but the pup's distress was absolute proof that the Beta harbored deep, volatile, and destructive intentions. Kale, still blinded by his assumption, noticed nothing, but Alara did. She saw the pure, unfiltered essence of the beta's concealed hatred reflected in the pup's misery. She suddenly understood. Kale was trusting the wrong man, and her fear shifted from Kale's judgment to Ronan's silent presence. She had a new goal: expose the true threat. Chapter 11. The Mistranslated Truth. The emotional intensity from the mirroring pup spurred Alara into reckless action. She knew Ronan was the source of the hidden grief. Now, she needed undeniable proof that she was not the monster Kale feared. She secretly slipped out of her wing late that night, using the shadows and the distraction of the pups, continuous low cries to enter the king's private archives. A desperate, high-stakes move. She found the original, brittle translation of the White Healer prophecy, kept separately from the public documents. She deciphered the ancient root words, the meaning shimmering into clarity like breaking ice. She realized the keyword, often translated as destruction, actually meant correction. The ancient phrase, resurrects kings and kills kingdoms, never meant destruction. It meant, she will restore rightful kings and end corrupted kingdoms. This was the midpoint shift. This fundamental truth detonated Alara's entire worldview. Her guilt over the fire, the burden she had carried for years, shattered. She hadn't destroyed her village. She had activated a power meant to correct a grave injustice. Because of this overwhelming realization, she collapsed onto the heavy oak floor, momentarily breathless from the relief and the horror. In that instant, a single, folded note, placed meticulously beneath the original scroll, fluttered onto her shoulder. It was crude parchment, written in a spidery, unfamiliar script, containing one chilling sentence. The fire was Beta's cleanup. The revelation of Ronan's crime was now explicit and undeniable. Chapter 12. The Stolen Bloodline. Alara raced back to her chamber, the crumpled note burning in her hand, the devastating weight of the midpoint shift making her movements feel frantic and clumsy. Before she could process the treasonous truth, Kale burst in, his face tight with a mix of fury and something akin to utter devastation. He held a piece of parchment, an analysis report from his royal scholars. "Tell me what this means," Kale roared, his dominant scent filling the room like smoke. The report confirmed that the intricate genetic markers found in the thawed pups, the heightened alpha dominance, the specific sensory gifts, were not random mutations. They were fragments of his own stolen royal bloodline, lost decades ago to a forgotten coup attempt. The pups were not creatures of dark magic. They were engineered heirs, crafted by his enemies. Consequently, his suspicions were entirely redirected. He assumed Alara, the creature with the power to awaken them, must be the agent of the rival faction, planted to unleash the weapons designed to overthrow him. "You are the key to my undoing," he snarled, the conflict between his duty and the overwhelming mate bond tearing him apart. Alara desperately tried to tell him about Ronan, about the mistranslation, about the fire, but Kale wasn't listening. He was consumed by the immediate, personal threat to his lineage. Furthermore, the fear of losing his kingdom, coupled with the primal need for his mate, drove him to a breaking point. Ignoring all reason, he seized her, pulled her fiercely against him, and without a word of permission, marked her, claiming her life force and destiny as his own. The heat was blinding. The decision was irrevocable. Chapter 13. The Draining Mark. The mate bond mark, fresh and searing against Alara's neck, was supposed to be a sign of permanent union, but instead, it became a siphon of her life force. The moment Kale claimed her, the corrupt lineage within the pups, now flowing through the reinforced bond, began to drain her strength, because the restoration magic was incompatible with the theft. She collapsed, the world spinning into a dizzying kaleidoscope of pain and fatting color. Her core felt hollow, suddenly colder than the ice that had preserved the pups. Kale watched in horror, his primal triumph instantly turning to panic. The mate he had just claimed, the creature he was bound to protect, was visibly dying because of him. He felt the rapid weakening through their connection, a horrifying realization: if she dies, I die. The mark was not securing his future, it was destroying it. He roared in anguish, a guttural sound of pure, desperate alpha instinct, frantically using his own immense strength to try and stabilize her, forcing a surge of his life force back through the bond. The effort left him visibly weakened, his face pale and slick with sweat. Furthermore, this near-death experience became her major commitment to a new, dangerous path. As Alara slowly clawed her way back from the brink, she knew the only way to save herself and Kale was to purify the lineage entirely. She had to accelerate the restoration of the pups, completing the process before the corrupted bond bled her dry. Ronan, watching from a distance, saw Kale's panic and Alara's fatting glow. This sight filled the traitor Beta with satisfaction, because the couple was unwittingly speeding toward the very crisis he needed to exploit. Chapter 14. The Healer Emerges. Despite her devastating weakness, Alara, now driven by pure survival and a fierce, possessive love for the pups, forced herself to approach the fourth pup, the one destined to be the healer. She gathered the last reserves of her life force, focusing her will not on healing herself, but on restoring the pup to its perfect, untainted form. The effort was agonizing, feeling like ripping sinews from her bones. A vibrant, silver light pulsed from her hands, bathing the fourth pup. The creature twitched, its eyes opening instantly, reflecting a gentle, warm green. This pup was immediately different, calm, centered, and radiating an overwhelming sense of health. It reached out and gently nudged Alara's hand, subtly transferring a measure of its newfound, restored energy back to her. This small, reciprocal flow was Alara's first major success, confirming the power of restoration was benign and pure, proving to Kale that she was not a mage of destruction. Consequently, Kale's last vestiges of doubt vanished. He watched the scene with profound awe and regret, finally accepting that his initial, duty-driven suspicions had nearly cost him everything. He vowed to protect her and the pups at all costs, regardless of the political repercussions. However, the momentary triumph was shattered when the fifth pup, the one that senses danger, awoke with a terrifying, piercing whine. It didn't point at Kale or Alara. It pointed directly toward the shadow where Ronan stood, confirming the beta's treachery with undeniable, instinctual certainty. Chapter 15. The Keystone is Lost. The fifth pup's frantic alarm confirmed their immediate danger. Kale moved instantly, recognizing the desperate warning of the royal bloodline. "Ronan," Kale whispered, the name a poisoned echo of betrayal. Alara, weak but resolute, urged him to act quickly. "He knows we are gaining control. He will strike now, before the lineage is complete." Their combined fear and need for vengeance solidified their bond, forging it into something hard and unbreakable. They raced toward the vault where the smallest, most fragile pup, the purest blood pup, the keystone Ronan desperately needed, was still frozen. Kale's goal was simple: secure the final heir. However, they arrived too late. The small ice slab was empty. Ronan had slipped in through a secret passage, snatching the pup just moments before their arrival. The beta had moved his final coup timeline forward, understanding that the completion of the lineage meant the destruction of his own power base. This escalation was the point of no return. Kale's face was etched with furious despair. He had lost his last chance to quietly secure his future. Ronan now possessed the final, critical component needed to corrupt the entire royal line and dethrone the Alpha King. Alara collapsed against Kale, sensing the devastating gravity of the loss. Their relationship was no longer about survival or romance. It was a desperate, immediate race against treason and impending civil war, because the Keystone Pup was the last, most precious piece of the future. Chapter 16. The Traitor's Storm. The storm broke with the swift, terrible violence of a cracked dam. Beta Ronan, backed by alphas corrupted by his dark, ambition-fueled magic and forbidden spellcasters he had secretly cultivated, launched a full-scale invasion of Blackstone Palace. The massive, ancient walls that had stood for centuries now groaned under siege, their collapse imminent. Kale, gripped by fury and despair over the loss of the Keystone Pup, fought savagely in the throne room, his golden eyes blazing with lethal, vengeful rage. Alara was terrified, but her fear was surpassed by a desperate resolve to protect the 5 partially restored pups still confined in the vault wing. She raced to them, her fatting life force struggling to keep the mate bond strong enough to communicate with Kale. The antagonist delivered his major blow when Ronan's forces breached the main gate. The floor of the palace shook violently. Kale's frantic mental plea reached her. "Run! Secure the pups now!" She knew she couldn't outrun the chaos. Because of this overwhelming danger, she decided to fortify their position. She used the last precious drops of her inner strength to weave a quick, fragile restoration barrier around the pup's chamber. It was weak, shimmering like thin silver glass, but it was the only protection she could offer. The effort left her breathless, dizziness overwhelming her senses, and she crumpled to the cold stone floor. She heard heavy, quick footsteps approaching, not Kale's. She realized she had been found. The first waves of corrupted alphas, fueled by Ronan's dark magic, were heading straight for her. Chapter 17, Shielding the Throne-Broken Heart. The corrupted alphas were ruthless, their movements distorted by dark energies that made their eyes glow sickly green. Alara struggled to her feet, instinctively placing herself between the attackers and the pup's fragile sanctuary. She was not a fighter, she was simply a desperate shield. She threw her weakening life force outward in small, panicked bursts, hopping to disorient them. It was futile. The attackers lunged toward the scent of the royal lineage. Then Kale arrived, a whirlwind of muscle and blood, transforming Midleap into a colossal, enraged black wolf, his roar shaking the very foundations of the palace. He fought with primal ferocity, tearing through the corrupted ranks, his vengeance singular and absolute. The emotional stakes soared. He was fighting not for his throne, but for the woman who represented his family's future and his soul's salvation. However, Ronan stepped out from the shadows, flanking Kale, holding a wickedly curved, shadow-infused blade, a weapon designed to pierce the thick hide of an alpha king. Alara saw the betrayal unfold in slow motion. Ronan plunged the blade toward Kale's unguarded side. Alara screamed, a raw, desperate sound, and propelled herself forward, covering the last few feet in a desperate lunge. She didn't manage to stop Ronan, but her intervention caused the beta to redirect his aim, shifting the trajectory of the killing blow meant for Kale's heart to his less protected flank. Kale roared as the blade found its mark, a catastrophic injury. Chapter 18, All Is Lost Wilted Flower. Kale collapsed with a deafening thud, the massive alpha form shuddering violently before reverting to his human shape, his gold eyes dimming. Ronan stood over him, a cold, triumphant sneer twisting his lips. "The king is dead," Ronan announced to the remaining corrupted forces, his voice echoing with wicked finality. Alara crawled to Kale's side, ignoring the pain that ripped through her own body. His life was draining onto the stone floor, dark and thick. The mate bond snapped violently, not just disconnecting, but tearing away, triggering a psychic shockwave that threw Alara back against the wall. The sudden, agonizing loss was a vacuum, stripping away her last bit of inner resolve. It was the all is lost moment, the ultimate defeat. She stared at Kale, her hands uselessly hovering over the fatal wound, because her restorative power was too weak, too depleted to manage such an impossible correction. Ronan strode past her, uninterested in the fatting Omega. He commanded his remaining forces to gather the 5 pups who were now whimpering in terror. "She is useless now. Her power is spent. She has failed her destiny." Ronan's cruel assessment pierced through her despair. He took the pups, leaving Alara alone with the silent, still body of the king. She was utterly defeated, her guilt returning tenfold. She had saved him only to watch him die. She had failed the prophecy, the pups, and her mate. She had lost everything. Chapter 19, The Spark of Correction Sparkles. Alara lay shattered beside Kale's still form, the crushing emptiness of the snapped mate bond making the silence of the throne room a physical agony. She was at her lowest point, defeated by her own perceived weakness. Then, a tiny, almost imperceptible surge of warmth touched her hand. It was the restored energy from the 4th pup, the healer, a subtle echo through the devastated connection. It was a turning point, a quiet, undeniable testament that the power of restoration was not gone, merely exhausted. This fragile spark ignited a fierce, desperate realization in her mind. Ronan was wrong. She hadn't failed because she was weak. She had failed because she had attempted the ultimate act, resurrecting a soul, alone. The power of correction, the true nature of the white healer, was meant to be shared. The corruption was in the stolen lineage, but the purity was in the bond. Her life force needed to channel the heir's power back to the king. It was a communal, familial magic. Furthermore, a surge of righteous fury, born from the deepest corner of her despair, galvanized her. She realized Kale hadn't died in vain. He had died to expose the traitor. Alara pulled herself up, every movement an effort, but her eyes held a new, steely focus. She was no longer running from guilt. She was running toward vengeance and the truth. She had a final chance, and it lay with the keystone pup Ronan had stolen. She knew the traitor would be performing the final corruption ritual in the highest, most ancient tower of the palace, where the wards were strongest, because that was always where the darkest magic was drawn. Chapter 20. The Final Reckoning Plan. Using the remnants of the mate bond, Alara reached out, finding the faint, disturbed presence of Ronan and the 6 pups in the upper reaches of the palace. The connection, though shattered, provided a roadmap. Her goal was clear: disrupt Ronan's ritual, protect the keystone pup, and perform the full restoration with the pup's channeled power. This required absolute focus and a final, desperate burst of life force. She stumbled through the ravaged halls, finding a discarded vial of healing elixir, a small, vital resource. She drank it quickly, the pungent, herbal liquid providing a momentary lift to her depleted reserves. She formulated a plan. She couldn't fight Ronan's corrupted alphas, but she could distract them. She needed to reach the 5 pups first, because they held the key to the purified lineage. She was now moving with focused, driven determination, the fear replaced by cold resolve. Moreover, as she climbed the winding, treacherous stairwell toward the tower, she encountered a small, loyal group of uncorrupted guards who had been trapped. They recognized the king's mark on her neck, faint though it was, and the desperate light in her eyes. Alara didn't need their strength. She needed their distraction. She told them the king was not defeated, but waiting for the lineage to be restored, because only the truth would inspire them to fight against impossible odds. This final commitment to leadership, and the plan prepared her for the direct confrontation looming above. Chapter 21. The Sacrifice of the Healer Fire. Alara burst into the ancient, circular chamber at the tower's peak. Ronan stood before a flickering, noxious altar, the 5 pups secured in wards nearby, and the tiny keystone pup suspended above the dark, bubbling ritual bowl. The air stank of sulfur and decay. "Too late, little Omega," Ronan sneered, his power surging as he prepared the final, annihilating strike on the purest blood. Alara didn't argue. She made her move, leaping past Ronan's guard, ignoring the stinging bursts of dark magic that lashed her skin. She reached the altar and plunged her hand into the wards protecting the keystone pup. Ronan screamed in fury, turning his full dark power on her. Ignoring the excruciating pain, she channeled every bit of her remaining life force, performing the ultimate restoration on the tiny, fragile pup. A brilliant, pure white light erupted, counteracting Ronan's shadowy ritual. The keystone pup was instantly whole, radiating untainted, raw royal alpha power. However, the act completely drained Alara, leaving her defenseless and collapsing to the stone. Ronan, blinded by rage, saw his final chance. He raised the shadow-infused blade high, aiming for the death blow. The confrontation was complete, the sacrifice made, but the fate of the queen, the king, and the kingdom hung on the cry of a restored pup. Chapter 22. The Sixfold Restoration Crown. The sound was not Kale's roar or Ronan's shriek. It was the tiny, pure-blood keystone pup's piercing cry, a blast of untainted alpha power that slammed into Ronan, momentarily freezing the traitor in place. Alara lay lifeless by the altar. The 5 remaining pups, sensing the completed purity of their youngest sibling and the near death of their mate mother, broke through the flimsy wards. They scrambled across the stone floor toward the king. Simultaneously, the 6 pups surrounded Kale's still body, pressing their small, warm forms against his massive, cold chest. The pure, amplified lineage from the keystone pup acted as a catalyst. The 5 older pups, channeling their diverse, restored royal traits, began pouring their stolen, yet now purified, life essence back into Kale. Alara, stirring faintly, felt the mate bond suddenly reignite, not as a painful siphon, but as a vast, powerful river of shared energy. She instinctively reached out, adding her final, restorative magic to the collective flow. For the first time, she performed the ultimate restoration with family. The room flashed with blinding, silvery gold light. Ronan shrieked as his own corrupted power base crumbled. Kale's eyes snapped open, a brilliant, terrifying gold. The mate bond was whole and his bloodline was corrected. The surge of pure power instantly stripped Ronan of his dark influence, leaving the beta weak, exposed, and captured. The central conflict was resolved not by a single warrior, but by the combined force of the restored lineage. Chapter 23. The King's Vow's Sparkling Heart. Kale rose, utterly transformed, the fatal wound vanishing without a trace. His strength was immense, yet his focus was entirely on Alara. He stumbled toward her, leaving the defeated Ronin to his loyal guards. He gently lifted Alara, her body limp but glowing with the returning life force. Relief, so vast it nearly buckled his knees, flooded him. He had been dead. She had pulled him back, not with magic, but through the unbreakable bond she forged with the heirs. The 5 older pups whined, nudging her cheek, while the small Keystone pup, nestled securely against Kale's shoulder, sent a single, clear thought through the mental link, a single, unexpected word. Father! This unexpected affirmation of paternity, the immediate consequence of the restoration, broke Kale's composure. Tears streamed down his scarred face. He realized his initial goal, vengeance and securing his kingdom, was shallow compared to the love and family Alara had given him. Consequently, he carried Alara down to the throne room, where the remaining loyal court members and guards knelt in silence. He did not go to his throne. He knelt beside the dais, gently placing Alara down. Looking up at his subjects, he made a solemn, heartbreaking declaration. I lay down my vengeance. My crown means nothing without her and these pups. He had chosen love and family over absolute, solitary power. Chapter 24. The White Queen Crown House. The immediate aftermath was one of quiet, profound transition. Ronin was secured for final judgment, stripped of all rank and influence. The corrupted alphas were dealt with, their dark magic dissolving in the palace's purified energy. The main plot threads were tied up. Alara awoke, no longer frail but radiating a calm, immense power, the fully accepted mantle of the Restorer. She looked at Kale, her heart overflowing with the knowledge that she was finally home, finally loved and truly understood. She accepted the new reality. She was not a curse. Kale, true to his word, offered her his crown not as a gift but as a shared burden. Alara, looking at the 6 tiny pups playing innocently at their feet, refused his sacrifice of the throne, but accepted a different title. Therefore, standing side by side, radiating the harmonious power of the mate bond and the restored lineage, they established a new equilibrium. Kale remained the Alpha King, but he ruled with Alara, the woman once feared as a curse, now hailed as the White Queen and the true restorer of the royal bloodline. The prophecy, long misunderstood, was fulfilled. They had their family, they had their home, and they had created the powerful, unified future the kingdom was always meant to have. The kingdom bowed before its rightful rulers, finally at peace.